to share another story with you. This week's story is a lot longer than the last couple of weeks. And if you remember a couple of weeks ago, I told you a story about Abraham and Sarah, and they had a son named Isaac. And you remember that son's name meant laughter, which was fun. And Isaac, in this story, this new story that I'm telling you today, has grown up. And it is time for him to find a wife. And how will that happen? You might think it doesn't happen in the way that it usually does, but then things happen in many, many different ways. So this is a story about, actually it's more about Isaac's wife and where she is and how she decides to become part of Isaac's life. And so I am going to tell you two stories about the same story, because stories are fun, and stories are, you can interpret or understand stories in so many different ways. If you go to the Bible and you read Genesis 24, that is one way to receive and understand the story. And then I have two more stories that are taken from Genesis 24. One of them is a little more fun and fantastical than the other. They're both fun, but one is kind of silly in some ways, and I think you might enjoy it. And it comes from the book, Does God Have a Big Toe? And the first story that I'm going to read you comes from the book, The Family Story Bible, which is where I read the first story about Isaac being conceived and being born, when I read that to you a couple of weeks ago. And so I am going to share all of that with you today. Two stories about one story. Here we go. Rebekah and Isaac, from Genesis 24. Sarah was 127 years old when she died. Isaac was a grown man by this time. He cried when his mother died. Isaac and his father Abraham buried her in a special place which they bought from some of the people who lived nearby. Before she died, she and Isaac and Abraham had some long talks about God's promise. Now Isaac remembered those talks with his mother, and he felt very lonely. "Isaac," said Abraham, "you need to get married." "But Dad," Isaac started to say. "Never mind, do what I say. You can't marry any of the women around here," Abraham said. "They don't live in God's way. They don't understand about God's promise." "But Dad," Isaac tried again. "Just be quiet and listen," said Abraham. "I'll send one of my servants to the place where we used to live. Long before you were born, Isaac. We have lots of uncles and aunts and cousins living there. They don't know about God's promise, but they try to live in God's way. Maybe the servant can find the right person for you to marry." So Abraham sent one of his servants, a man named Eliezer, to the town of Nahor, where Abraham's relatives had still lived. He made Eliezer promise to find just the right woman. To help the servant, Abraham sent along 10 camels loaded down with good things. These were gifts Eliezer could give Abraham's relatives. When Eliezer got to Nahor, he was hot and tired. He stopped to rest in the shade of some trees that grew near a well. While he was resting, Eliezer watched the people come to the well to get water. The servant prayed to God, "Please help me choose the right person." Then he saw Rebekah coming to the well. "Could you give me a drink of water?" he said to Rebekah. "Of course," she said, and without being asked, she gave water to all 10 camels too. That was hard work because camels drink lots and lots of water. The well was very deep. She was quite tired by the time she finished, but she didn't mind. Rebekah felt it was important to be kind to strangers. She often offered to help people when they seemed to need it. The servant smiled as he watched Rebekah carry water to his camels. "I think this is the woman God would like me to bring to Isaac, so they can share the promise together." "Thank you," said Abraham's servant when Rebekah had finished. "Is there room at your house for me to spend the night?" "Of course," said Rebekah. "We've got lots of room and food for you and for your camels." There was lots to talk about at Rebekah's house that night. They invited Eliezer to have supper with them. Before he would eat, he had to tell them about the news about Abraham and Sarah and Isaac, and of course he explained why he had come. "I think God wants me to invite Rebekah to share the promise with Isaac," Eliezer said. Rebekah's mother and her brother and all the rest of the family didn't know what to think. They talked about whether Rebekah should go or shouldn't she go. Nobody said, "Let's go ask Rebekah." Finally, they all agreed. Rebekah should go. That's when Eliezer brought out all the wonderful gifts he had brought. He gave them all to Rebekah's family. They all talked as if it didn't matter what Rebekah thought. The next day, someone said, "Maybe we should ask Rebekah." So they did. "I'll go," said Rebekah, "right now." "Right now?" said her mother. "Couldn't you wait for a week or so?" "No, I want to go right now," Rebekah insisted. The servant smiled to himself. She can think for herself, he thought. She's not only got a strong body, she's got a strong spirit too. Rebekah and Isaac will like each other. The next morning they all left, the servant and his helpers and all 10 camels, and Rebekah and all her helpers. There were lots of hugs and tears and goodbyes, and then they set off. It took many days to get to where Isaac lived in Canaan. Rebekah didn't like riding on camels one bit. Sometimes she felt sick because the camels would sway back and forth. Once she had to throw up. Sometimes she hated the smell of the camels. Sometimes she was just plain bored. It was a long trip. One day, Eliezer told her, "We're getting close to Canaan now." Rebekah began to get excited. When she saw a man walking in a field, she asked Eliezer, "Who's that?" "That," said Eliezer, "is Isaac. He's the man you have come to marry." "Make the camel kneel so I can get off," said Rebekah. Then she began walking across the field toward Isaac. Isaac saw Rebekah coming across the field. They had never seen each other before, and yet they knew they were going to be husband and wife. Both Rebekah and Isaac had thought of things they would say to each other when they met. Now neither could think of anything. They walked together toward the tent where Sarah, Isaac's mother, had lived. Rebekah and Isaac were married in that tent. In time, they came to love each other very deeply, and Rebekah often thanked God because of the promise that she and Isaac shared. Rebekah and the camel who made no noise. Abram, whom God renamed Abraham, told Eliezer his servant to go back east and find a wife for his son Isaac. Eliezer did not want to go, but Abraham told him that God would help out by sending along an angel. Abraham had no idea at the time how God would do this, and frankly, neither did God. Now Eliezer wasn't an angel, and the other servants weren't angels, so that just left the camels. God figured he would make one of the camels into an angel just for the trip. After all, the point of the journey was to find a wife for Isaac, and to do this, Eliezer and the angel had to watch the women of the east without being noticed. God figured that if Eliezer took along a guy with wings, white robes, a halo, and a harp, who floated through the air, they might be noticed. So that is why the angel had to be a camel. When God asked for volunteers, nobody raised a wing, so God called upon Max. Max was the angel God called upon for all the really tough jobs. Max was the one who had to tell the extra lions and tigers that they could not go in the ark with Noah. Max was the angel who had to kick the snake out of the Garden of Eden. Max was the angel who had to collect all the slimy bugs for Adam to name. Max got all the tough jobs. So the caravan to the east finally took off with Eliezer riding on Max. Max found that speaking camel was a cinch, but making the other camel noises was not so easy. Also, one of the girl camels liked Max and kept licking his nose. Now, Rebekah was the granddaughter of Abraham's brother Nahor. She was sweet, kind, and beautiful, and she loved animals. People in the town said that Rebekah could speak the languages of chipmunks and rabbits, lizards and snakes, elephants and mice, eagles and goats. But Rebekah did not like camels. It was not the fact that they were ugly. It was not the fact that they drank so much water that she had to go to the well 100 times to fill their humps. What bothered Rebekah most was the loud camel noises they made. One day, Eliezer and his caravan of 10 camels, really it was 9 camels and Max, came to the well of the city where Nahor lived. They arrived late in the afternoon. The women of the city were out drawing water for the flocks of sheep and goats. There were not many camels in the city where Nahor lived because the people didn't travel much. Also, they had a small well and worried that too many camels would drink up all the water. When the women saw Eliezer and his camel caravan, they shooed them away. "Go, get out of here! Find another well!" Eliezer started to leave, but the camels sat down and started to make every noise they could. Rebekah came over to Eliezer and said in front of all the women, "You may drink from our well, and your camels may drink too." Then Rebekah walked over to Max and looked at him in a funny way. She spoke to him in camel, saying, "You are very sweet. You did not complain, and you don't make camel noises. Come, you shall be the first to drink." Max answered her in camel, "My humps are still full. What are the other camels first?" So Rebekah led the camels to the well, and they drank, and Eliezer drank, and finally Max drank. Rebekah worked most of the day drawing water for all the flocks and the camels. In the morning, Eliezer asked Rebekah to return with him to become Isaac's wife. She said yes. So the caravan of Eliezer came to the city of Nahor with 10 camels, but left with only 9. Rebekah looked all over for the quiet camel who did not make camel noises, but she could not find him. Up in heaven, Max was climbing out of his camel suit. God greeted Max in the way that God greets all angels and thanked him. Then God said, "Max, in a little while I am going to need an angel to speak to Moses out of a burning bush. There's a fireproof suit over there in the corner. Why don't you just try it on for size?"